Hi, welcome back. This is Dr. Burton, and we are going to talk about sources of skepticism today. In the last video, we talked about popular skepticism, person on the street skepticism. Remember, skepticism is the view that says knowledge is not possible. And today we want to talk about more philosophically rooted skepticism. So let's look at this first part. Skepticism, or intellectual despair, is rooted in our uncritically held assumptions. So let's talk about this. Despair is a kind of hopelessness, right? Intellectual despair is hopelessness with respect to having knowledge. So the intellect is our thinking, and it's despair related to thinking. We really can't know. It's rooted in our uncritically held assumptions. So assumptions are views that we hold. We don't even know we hold them. You've heard about implicit biases. Assumptions are deeper. They are philosophical positions we hold to. We don't even know we have them. And they're uncritically held. I'm going to suggest that our uncritically held assumptions are probably connected to our personality type. So we have people who are intellectually inclined, people who are psychologically inclined, people who are practically inclined, doers. So idea people, doers. They each have a fallback epistemology. Remember, epistemology is how do I know? So you have a fallback epistemology. Your job now is to figure it out. As we go through these, say, oh yeah, that's me. And then start becoming more conscious of it. And if you are feeling skeptical, like, let me back up. Skeptical is a good thing to be. Skeptical is wanting more evidence. It's like, I'm not really sure about that. I just read this article on the internet about vaccines. Seems a little fishy. I need more evidence. That's being skeptical, and that's healthy. Skepticism has an ism at the end, and that's unhealthy because it says we can't have knowledge about vaccinations. That would be really bad, right? We tend to think science, right? So we want to see, where does this skepticism come in? It's very, very popular right now. Like, if you weren't a skeptic in the strong sense, I would be super surprised. If you think knowledge is possible, then send me an email and let me know. I'm a weirdo that thinks knowledge is possible. I wrote a whole book on it. My book, Retrieving Knowledge, here it is all about how we can have knowledge. Shameless plug. Okay, informal fallacies. So the question, you want to know what's on the exam? Here's the core question for this handout. What are the 6 sources of skepticism? That's the first part, where you could list each one. The second part is, what is assumed in each? So each of these sources of skepticism has an assumption. We're looking for those assumptions. I want you to know these because they are prevalent in human history, not just now, but always. And if you think about it this way, human beings have a body, human beings have a mind. These are either going to rely on aspects of our body or our mind, or experience in some way. I'm saying a body because that's about experience. Experience or thinking, and thinking can go badly, right? Thinking gone wrong. That's the first one here. Informal fallacies is our first problem. And I'm going to say this is maybe a fallacy for those personalities that are more inclined to think and argue and get on the internet and argue with people. Debate. So informal fallacies involves the use of irrelevant appeals as a substitute for the use of reason, not knowing we're doing it, and logical argument. So they're fake arguments. They look like arguments, but they're fake arguments. And you can see a list of them here. I will go over them in detail in the next video. So I'm not going to go over them now, but you can see ad hominem, straw man, arguing in a circle, appeal to pity, fear, popularity. And then it says see list of informal fallacies because that's the next handout. Okay, what do they assume? What do I need to know on the test? Here it is. This is what you need to know for the test. Informal fallacies assumes that If pseudo argument does not succeed, no argument will succeed, where pseudo is fake. So these are fake arguments. You might be tricked by them because they seem like an argument, or you might use them because you thought it was an argument, and you never get knowledge by doing that. And then you say, oh, I tried to know things through argument. You can't do it. And then you fall into skepticism. So maybe we need to back up and say, was that really an argument? Really? Or was it a fake argument? Okay, informal fallacies. We'll learn them next time, and we're never ever going to use them again. We're going to clean up the world by not using fake arguments. Remember discourse pollution? We're going to clean it up. Okay, tradition and custom is the second one. I'm going to say this isn't maybe any particular personality, but maybe everyone. Maybe everyone has an element of tradition and custom. And we get our basic beliefs by being born into a family, born into a society, a culture, a civilization, and their values are passed on to us through the institutions of culture, through education. And we sometimes just accept it because that's what we were told. So tradition and custom, here's what you need to know for the test, assumes what we are most comfortable with is true. And perhaps this is what some of the critiques of critical theory are pointing out. This idea of white privilege. You guys thought it was true because it was comfortable, and it was comfortable for you because you were in a position that was passed on to you through tradition. So tradition and custom can become a source of skepticism. So here are some examples. Since it's been around a long time, it's true. It's right because that's the way I've been taught. Most people I know think and act this way. And here's what happens. This certainty about our own tradition melts in our exposure to other cultures or hardens into prejudice. And I think this is what's happening right now in the United States in our race discussions. Black Lives Matter versus white privilege. So we have, I'm going to suggest different cultures coming into contact with one another, and it is a power struggle, but it's also a moment for people to go, maybe the way I was raised is wrong. Or the other response is, those people, they're wrong, right? So we have this skepticism that could happen about our tradition, or prejudice about other traditions. And I'm suggesting that happens when we rely on tradition and custom as a source of knowledge. Tradition and custom is not a source of knowledge, it's a source of tradition. And maybe tradition needs to be supported by argument and reason. And we haven't really done that. And so in our culture right now, all the traditions are being shaken up because they aren't supported by reason, and we're skeptical. Nobody could really know. There isn't one tradition. Remember, there's so many views. It's all relative. This is connected. That's what happens when we rely on tradition and custom as a source of knowledge. It doesn't produce knowledge, and then we go into skepticism or fideism or prejudice. And I'm going to say those are all bad responses. What we should do is back up and try to get knowledge. Okay, common sense. Now, common sense isn't like, don't go out into the rain without a raincoat, or look both ways before crossing the street. Common sense is a movement in philosophy that takes appearance to be reality. So here's the piece you need to know for the test. Common sense assumes that appearance is reality. It's called naive realism. Realism takes the world to be real without proving it. And this position is based on experience, sense perception. What you see is what it is. And this has led to skepticism over and over again. So let me ask you, is the earth flat? Think about that. You're going to say no. Well, how do you know that? No. Common sense would say the earth appeared flat back in the day. And, you know, this story about Christopher Columbus, they were like, don't do it, Christopher Columbus. Don't sail the ocean blue because the ocean has an edge and you'll fall off of it, right? That's the legend we hear. But I think it was a popular view that the earth is flat because it appeared flat. And if you don't have means for going around the earth, then you just go with what appears, right? And what about, does the sun rise in the east? Does it set in the west? Do you know that people thought at one point in our past that the Earth was at the center of the universe and the sun and all the planets are moving around the Earth? Is that true? Can you see how people would think that, though? That's how it appeared to them. And they had a philosophical set of assumptions that supported it, but it wasn't true. And so we have the Copernican revolution, where we find out that really the Earth is revolving around the sun. And this rocked people's worlds. It brought in a lot of skepticism, too. Like, oh my gosh, we trusted our senses, and our senses deceived us. We can't really know. What color is the ocean? Depends on where you are, right? The ocean could be blue, green, gray, clear, depending on where you are. So common sense takes the condition of the perceiver for granted. It works in a small community of people that have the same assumptions. And so perhaps people took for granted that there is a God in the past. Everybody knows there's a God. But then you have doubters that come in and say, no, that's not clear to me. I don't see that. I have doubts. And then common sense goes out the window because now you have these doubters. Oh no, what do? You go back and give arguments. You don't rely on common sense or your senses to deliver knowledge. We don't have to get stuck in that. Skepticism. Okay, intuition. Now this is one we might have to have a little talk about because I know we're living in an age of feeling. And a lot of what goes on in culture right now is based on feeling. And perhaps even a whole generation is more based on feeling. So not just that, but there are personality types that are more in tune with feelings. People. Parents have to understand what's going on with little baby children who can't speak yet. They need to have tools for doing that. And intuition and feelings can be that. Also in the arts. So let's talk about what is intuition and what is it about intuition that can lead to skepticism. So intuition assumes that the natural sign is always accompanied by reality or the sign is the reality. So notice intuition has to do with sign and reality. Here's a sign. What's the reality? The sign is friendliness or a smile, and the reality is friendliness, right? Ordinarily, but what if I'm having an evil thought right now? Like, wow, it's really hot out here and I wish I could turn the air conditioning on and be done with this video, right? I could be harboring bad thoughts and have a sign that doesn't match it, right? So intuition assumes sign and reality always go together. Other signs, look at here. Truth is beauty and beauty is truth, says Keats, a poet. Isn't that true, though? Think of beautiful people. Think of the Hollywood people. They're beautiful, right? Beautiful in some cultural sense. Are they honest people? Are they truthful people? Can we tell by just looking at them? No, but intuition wants us to think that that's the case. That beauty and goodness or beauty and truth go together, and they don't always go together. And so we get tricked when we rely on our intuition. How about pleasure and goodness? Do they always go together? If the cake is pleasurable, is it good? Is it good for you? The older I get, the more I realize if it's pleasurable, you're going to die from it. Probably. How about sex and love? Do they go together? Oh, if we were in class right now, we'd be having a really funny discussion. You guys would say, no! And I'd say, always? Isn't sex a sign of love? Sex, a uniting of two people. Isn't that a sign of two people wanting to unite in more than just their bodies? Love? Yes, ordinarily they go together, but guess what? They don't always. And that's why we get our hearts broken, because intuition tells you, oh, I've united with this person, they must love me. And they don't always. I mean, sometimes they do. Sometimes. But we have to be discerning to know if this is a sign that goes with reality. So we could divorce the sign from the reality, and then the reality is desecrated, right? We have words for that. The F word, what's the F word? Sex without love, right? Smile and friendliness, they don't always go together. So intuition assumes this is a morally ideal world. In a morally ideal world, sign and reality would always go together. But guess what, kids? This is not a morally ideal world. It's a fallen, broken world. And if you rely on your intuition and you, well, you know what? Let me back up a step. The person who relies on their intuition sometimes is the romantic idealist. The romantic idealist wants the ideal world, and they want it now, and they want it perfect and without hard work. They expect that. And when they don't have that, they get sad. And this might be the poetic type, the musician type, the emo music type. And I know some of you are there, and I know it because I've seen you in my classrooms. I live with the romantic idealist. Okay, so I understand how this works theoretically. And my pep talk for you is this. You can have the ideal, but you're going to have to add time, a long time, and hard work towards achieving the ideal. I think a lot of what's happening in the political realm right now are the romantic idealists look at society, it's not perfect, we need justice, we need it now, without recognizing, hey, we need justice, true, but we can't have it without hard work and really good arguments. So let's roll up our sleeves and get to work for social justice, okay? Because it's not going to come quickly. There's not going to be some utopia quickly on Earth. Okay, rant about romantic idealism over. Thank you for listening to that. I hope that was helpful to you. This is not a morally ideal world. It's a broken world, but we can repair it through hard work. And not just hard work, good ideas. We need really good ideas to change the world and make it a better place. Okay, what about science? Why is science on here? Science can become a source of skepticism when we don't stick with the scientific method and we go with science as a totalizing worldview. Scientism. Scientism is a thing. Google it. Scientism is when we use the word science as if it's something objective and we don't recognize that we're talking about a complete world and life view that has philosophical assumptions. So let's look at how this works. And I want you to, I'll show you what to put on the test when we get there. Science is being misused and becomes a source of skepticism when its methods are overextended to a philosophical principle. So science uses the senses, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, to explore the physical world, right? And we make hypotheses. We have a problem. We make a hypothesis. We do an experiment. We collect data. We interpret the data. We publish the data, and it can be verified or falsified, right? Probably falsified. And that's how science proceeds, right? That's legitimate science. Science, illegitimate science is philosophy. And here's what I want you to know, because it's the underlying, the house. So the floor level, the ground level is this. When empiricism is assumed, science becomes a source of skepticism when empiricism is assumed. And empiricism is that all of our knowledge is ultimately from sense experience. There are no innate ideas of reason apart from experience, okay? That's a philosophical assumption. Why should I believe that? All of our knowledge is through the senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. If you can't see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, then guess what? It doesn't exist. Who believes that? Scientism. All right. Science becomes a source of skepticism when it goes beyond its empirical boundary, what we can observe. So science should do the observable world, right? But it goes beyond that. When it does these philosophical things, it assumes only natural or material forces must be used to explain phenomenon. So the number one is called methodological naturalism. The method we're going to use is that all that exists is nature. Number two is called metaphysical naturalism. All that exists is nature. Why should I believe that? Do they provide an argument? They can't, because it goes by the senses only. Argument doesn't have a place here. Point three, science becomes a source of skepticism when it fails to distinguish data, which is from our experience, from fact, which is data interpreted in light of philosophical assumptions. So remember when I draw the house? So here we have the ground is empiricism. The foundation material monism or naturalism. The house, and there's a person in the house. The person is interpreting experiences, data, in light of empiricism and materialism, and not noticing they have those assumptions. So it fails to distinguish data from fact, which is data interpreted in light of philosophical assumptions. Science becomes a source of skepticism when it fails to notice that science does and must have philosophical foundations which have to be critically analyzed for coherence of meaning. The ground, epistemology, and the foundation, metaphysics. And then lastly, when you start to draw that picture of the house, science becomes a source of skepticism when skeptical disclaimers such as tentativeness and pragmatism are used to forego philosophical criticism of its assumptions. So we draw the house, and then we start asking questions about, well, isn't this a philosophical assumption, empiricism? And isn't this a philosophical assumption, material monism? And aren't you interpreting everything in light of those assumptions? They'll put up a shield to protect the house, and the shield is, give us more time, and we can prove it scientifically. I've been hearing that all my life about the mind. If the mind is just a motion of atoms in the brain, we should be able to prove that thinking's happening in the brain scientifically, right? I don't know, 20 years I've been hearing, give us more time, science will prove it. I have yet to see that proof. So that's one move. And then pragmatism says science works. Science gives you cures for diseases and technology like this iPhone. So why would you want to question it? No. You know what? Science would work better if it had better foundations. How about that? Maybe some of the problems of science are because they have faulty foundations, faulty assumptions. Anyways, science can become a source of skepticism, and it has in our culture in the West. Okay, reason. Why is reason on here? Isn't reason how we're going to know things? Yes, but notice reason can become a source of skepticism. So what I want you to know for the test is this first piece. Reason is a source of skepticism when it is misused or not fully used. So when it is misused, it's used as a source of truth rather than as a test for meaning. For example, the Declaration of Independence starts off, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, right? And what are these rights? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Is it self-evident, like a self-evident truth of reason that all men are created equal? All human beings are created? Or is that something that's under dispute today? Is that something you want to say, prove it? Right, so that's a misuse of reason. It's misused when it's used as a source of truth, saying this is a self-evident truth, and then people doubt it, and then we go, see, we really can't know. Say, you should have backed up and said, what do you mean first? So we corrected this by saying meaning is more basic than truth. Meaning first, then truth. Meaning is logically prior. And reason becomes a source of skepticism when it is not fully used, and it is not fully used when it's used constructively only to build the house, and not first and fundamentally used critically to examine basic assumptions for coherence of meaning. So lots of philosophers, particularly the rationalists in the history of philosophy, have used reason to construct systems of philosophy, and those systems of philosophy turn out to be not true. They don't match reality, and so reason gets rejected at that point. So reason has gotten a bad rap in the history of philosophy because people build systems in the name of reason, and they weren't supported by reason. So how can we correct that? We, as a class, are going to correct that by using reason critically first and then constructively. We're going to prove our epistemology and our metaphysics before we construct a house on top of them. And that's why we start with epistemology. And we're clearing the ground right now. We're clearing all kinds of rubble out of the way so we could start having a nice piece of ground upon which to build. So let's wrap up this handout. Today we talked about the sources of skepticism and how it's rooted in our uncritically held assumptions and how this may be part of our personality. Maybe the intellectually inclined go with informal fallacies. Maybe everybody goes with tradition and custom. The practical person might go with common sense. The feeling-oriented person might go with intuition. The practical person might go with science. And the intellectual might go with reason. So you should think about, what's my fallback position? And should I rely on that, or should I back up and say, no, I'm going to rely on reason and I'm not going to fall into skepticism. I hope that's what you'll choose. And next time we're going to go over the informal fallacies, and that piece should help us along the way to doing better at thinking clearly, critically, and overcoming skepticism. So thank you for joining me. I will see you in the next lesson.